And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the lunchtime webinar. I'm John Ridd, and I'm doing the anchor role for today. And with our webinar today, our speaker is Melanie Darlington, who is a senior human resources consultant with the risk management company Alcumus. Today, she's going to be talking to us about a very topical subject area. One in which I think we've actually had some legislation or regulations issued this week. And she's going to be touching on a range of subjects which I think all test similar principles of social and professional interaction. Those of equality, diversity, and gender discrimination. I'm sure she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but those are very pertinent issues at the moment. Now, as always, before we start, I need to just do the housekeeping. I need to point out to you the opportunity for putting questions to Melanie. And if you can type these into the box on the admin panel on the right of your screen, type these either during or after the presentation. And then at the end of Melanie's presentation, I will try to put as many of these to her as we got time for. Okay, enough of me. Let me now hand straight over to Mel for her presentation entitled Equality and Diversity in the Workplace. So Mel, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Welcome to today's session on equality and diversity. I'll be discussing what diversity means in the UK today and how to apply today's learning points in the workplace. We all want to ensure that the workplace is a safe and comfortable place for everyone, and the investment in training in this subject is a very positive step by any organisation to help staff understand the legal and company expectations in respect of equality. The aims for today's quick 20 to 30 minute webinar are to help you support a change in the way that you think about equality and diversity in the workplace, support you in working to help your organisation realise the full benefits of a diverse workforce, and increase your awareness and sensitivity towards diversity and equality subjects, and finally to hopefully take a step forward in becoming an equality champion. Diversity in any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. Diversity is the range of human differences, including but not limited to the list shown on this slide. Diversity allows for the exploration of these differences in a safe, positive, and nurturing environment. And it means understanding one another by exceeding simple tolerance to ensure people truly value their differences. Equality in the workplace is concerned with breaking down the barriers that currently block opportunities for certain groups of people. It aims to identify and minimise the barriers that exclude people and to encourage action to achieve equal access to all aspects of work for everyone. Everyone in your organisation brings with them a diverse set of perspectives, work and life experiences, as well as religious and cultural differences. Whilst listening and after the webinar, ask yourself if you're prepared for equality and diversity in your workplace. For example, do you offer equality in training and benefits? Do your staff feel comfortable with expressing their needs? Are you letting them share their ideas? The power of diversity can only be unleashed and its benefits reaped when we recognise these differences and learn to respect and value each individual irrelevant of their background. We all know that the UK workforce is changing. Many people are continuing to work instead of retiring. Women now make up almost half of the workforce, and around 1 in 10 of the UK working age population are from an ethnic minority, whilst 1 in 4 primary school children are from an ethnic minority. Having staff at all levels from a wide range of background skills can help develop a working environment, producing ideas and solutions that might not come from a smaller array of diverse groups. A diverse workforce can also help an organisation better understand and meet diverse customer expectations. Employment of staff with roots in other countries and cultures can help the organisation build relations with a wider range of customers and to market its products or services more appropriately and sensitively. This is relevant in organisations where the driver is enhancing their brand reputation, because tendering for business now will often require information to evidence commitment to diversity and inclusion in the workplace. I've written some statistics down. I'm going to share them with you now. Only 29% of MPs are female. Only 9.7% of executives are women in FTSE 100 companies. It was in 2003 that discrimination due to sexual orientation became illegal, yet 32% of LGBT employees choose to hide their sexual orientation. BME individuals represent 10% of the workforce, yet only 6% of that group hold top management positions. It's also important that we discuss inclusion. Inclusion is involvement and empowerment where the inherent worth and dignity of all our people are recognised. An inclusive workplace promotes and sustains a sense of belonging, and it values and practices respect for talents, belief, backgrounds and ways of living for its workforce. Differences could be self-evident, such as national origin, age, race and ethnicity, etc. Or they could be more inherent, such as educational background, training, sector experience, organisational tenure, even personality in our extrovert and extrovert employees. Ultimately, inclusion is a sense of belonging. Inclusion cultures make people feel respected and valued for who they are, not just as an individual. Evidence shows that when people feel valued, they function at full capacity and feel part of the organisation's mission. This culture shift creates higher performing organisations where motivation and morale develop and amplify. Inclusion often means developing a shift in an organisation's mindset and culture with visible effects such as participation in meetings, how offices are physically organised, or access to particular facilities or information. Diversity and inclusion is a sizable challenge for any organisation, though, especially those that have previously been less diverse and demonstrably exclusive. It should start with treating everyone fairly to nurture talent, instilling the culture with true inclusiveness and equality. So what does this mean to your organisation? Diversity is about being able to be who you are with no fear of judgment. We all have different life experiences that have shaped and defined our thoughts and working styles. But ultimately, everyone should be able to work in an environment where it doesn't matter about appearance, ethnicity, things like that, but one that places importance on the value that each person brings to the team, clients, and organisation. The world has changed for the positive, and workplaces are expected to provide equal footing to all. Employees don't have to be in the office now between 9 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. wearing a suit, as we have done historically. There's more flexibility and trust in the workplace, and the advancement of technology has led to an evolution in the way that we work. The use of smartphones and advanced IT platforms, for example, allow flexible approaches to work, locations, and hours. Considering more flexibility in this regard increases employee well-being and allows employees to work in a way that embraces their individuality and motivation to be successful in the workplace. Some recent analysis conducted by Regis noted that 11% of all employment today is associated with flexible workspaces in the UK. This study states that a predicted boom in flexible working could contribute £148 billion to the economy by 2030. The specific benefits of flexible working approaches include higher business and personal productivity, lower overheads for office space for companies using flexible workspaces, and millions of hours saved commuting. What's more people working flexibly can also fuel increased economic activity via higher employee earnings. The study also looked at employee well-being and states that flexible working is set to save individuals in the UK 115 million hours of commuting time by 2030. That's equivalent to 14 million days spent at work. The motivation for flexible working is further supported by the fact that more than 9 out of 10 professionals think workers are more productive when operating from a flexible workspace. The Act that we consider from a legal point of view is the Equality Act 2010. As an employer, you have a legal obligation to comply with the Equality Act and stamp out discrimination from your workplace. This means developing policies and practices that guarantee people are equally treated according to their needs. Under the Act, it's unlawful to discriminate against people at work because of 9 areas termed in the legislation as protected characteristics, and these are noted on the slide. If an employee believes they've been discriminated against, they will usually connect this to one or more of the 9 protected characteristics. But the way in which they have been allegedly discriminated against will determine which type or types of discrimination apply within their protected characteristic. Employees who believe they've been subjected to discrimination or who believe they have witnessed discrimination in the workplace should be able to feel confident in raising the matter with their employee and assured it is taken seriously. And this would be done via the grievance procedure. The Equality Act makes certain exemptions and exceptions where in some limited situations treating employees and job applicants less favourably can be lawful. For example, in certain and rare circumstances, it may be lawful for an employer to specify that applicants for a job must have a certain protected characteristic under the Act. Both employers and the employees can be held responsible and liable for their actions where they discriminate, so it's key that staff are trained and understand their roles. It's normal then, therefore, that we would have an equal opportunities policy, and it's important that the employers set out the policy to provide equal employment opportunities to all employees. This policy should protect against discrimination and should be related to, but not limited to, these points: recruitment and selection, appointments, promotions, transfers, leave of absence, termination, rates of pay, training, and all use of facilities. Whilst it's important to have policies, though, it's important that the organisation is committed to an ongoing programme of equal employment and non-discrimination for all. The policies should also relate to how the organisation offers and provides services to customers and the community. We all know and accept that the policy should be clear. Employees will only be promoted on a fair and non-discriminatory basis. What's key and common that I don't see as often in my role is that policies should be periodically reviewed to ensure that the aims are being met and that that's constantly being fed into employees and their knowledge. When considering selection and promotion, workers should be treated equally based on their relevant aptitudes, skills, abilities, without regard to any of their protected characteristics. A key point to consider here is that employees are required to comply with policy, and acknowledgement must be given to the specific responsibilities which fall upon them as managers or supervisors, and individuals involved in recruitment, employee and administration should also hold responsibility. You should consider, therefore, what training you give your employees to ensure they can confidently apply policy and fair practice. Policies alone are not enough to build an inclusive workplace, and inclusion shouldn't be a box-ticking exercise. It's not acceptable to rely on policy alone, though, as understanding the policy, the application of it, and the practice and precedent of staff will be considered if ever a challenge is made at tribunal. It's the duty of all your employees to accept their responsibility for the practical application of these policies, and it's not sufficient to simply ask employees to read the policy when they first start with the business and trust the principles are being applied. Regular discussion, review of practice and training about equality is a positive step for all workplaces. Many employers have found that making adaptations to their working practices to accommodate a diverse workforce makes good business sense, as well as helping them meet the requirements of equality legislation. It makes their businesses more attractive to both potential employees and customers and helps them recruit and retain the best people. Encouraging greater awareness and understanding of the different protected characteristics alongside tackling discrimination can help reduce the chance of complaints, disciplinary action, or even employment tribunal claims, and avoid the cost and disruption to the organisation. It's likely to improve team morale as employee or groups of employees who are being discriminated against are likely to be unhappy and less productive and demotivated, and this obviously has a negative impact on the whole workforce. You would also expect it to have a positive effect on attracting, motivating and retention of staff, enhancing the organisation's reputation as an employer. If staff who've been discriminated against feel undervalued or forced out and leave, the organisation will run up the costs of recruiting, training and settling in new staff, etc. Finally, on this part, it should be transparent that the consequences of any failure to comply with policy, in whole or in part, could be disciplinary action, which may result in warning or dismissal for gross misconduct, depending on the severity of the circumstance. I've noted 4 specific types of discrimination to explain in more detail. These are direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, and discrimination by association and perception. Direct discrimination is when there is clear and obvious discrimination, where someone receives less favourable treatment as a result of their protected characteristic. This is justifiable only by genuine occupational requirement, which I touched on earlier. Examples of a genuine occupational requirement are where the job involves working with people from an ethnic group. You may need someone from the same ethnic background and speak the same language. Or where the job requires someone of a particular sex for reasons of privacy or decency. For example, a job working in a changing room. Indirect discrimination is where there is a practice or policy or rule which applies to everyone in the same way, but has a worse effect on some people than others. The Equality Act says it puts you at a particular disadvantage. To explain, given an example, it's a fact that mainly women work part-time, as historically they have been those responsible for childcare. As such, if you were conducting a redundancy exercise, for example, and all part-time staff were made redundant, there is a potential that this would affect the majority of women, and thus a potential argument for an indirect discrimination claim from that group. Associative discrimination comes about when someone is treated unfavourably on the basis of another person's protected characteristic. For example, a candidate was told she was getting a job and then was suddenly deselected after revealing she had a severely disabled child with complicated care arrangements. The withdrawal of the job offer amounted to discrimination because of her association with a disabled person, disability being a protected characteristic. Discrimination by association doesn't apply to all protected characteristics, though. Marriage and civil partnership and pregnancy and maternity are not covered by this legislation, nor does it apply to instances of indirect discrimination. It has to be direct. Discrimination by perception is when someone is treated unfavourably because others believe they have a protected characteristic, even though in reality they don't have it. It is still perceptive discrimination. An example of this was when an employee who was rejected for promotion in a supermarket buying team that sourced alcohol. And they did this because the employee had an Arabic name and the employer assumed that he was a Muslim and therefore wouldn't want to work with alcohol. This is considered to be discrimination by perception, whether or not the employee was a Muslim. As with associative discrimination, perceptive discrimination does not apply to marriage and civil partnership, nor pregnancy and maternity, and it must be direct discrimination. I've chosen 3 specific subjects to discuss in more detail in respect of diversity. These are neurodiversity, gender equality, and gender support. Neurodiversity is a concept where neurological differences are to be recognised and respected as any other human variation. These differences can include those labelled as above on this slide, and some of these conditions are referred to as specific learning difficulties, or SPLDs. Neurodiversity is a broader reference, though, to the diversity of the human brain and people's neurocognitive functioning, and unlike the SPLD title, reflects the fact that these conditions are not solely related to learning and that they can confer strengths as well as weaknesses. Support for mental health and employee welfare is at the forefront of our minds now, and there's often a lack of confidence in how to support an employee with a neurodiverse condition. ACAS recently conducted research in this subject, and some common themes were evidenced. Problems with underperformance are particularly likely to arise where managers are not aware of someone's neurological condition. Disclosure can be very helpful in preventing performance issues, but this needs to be handled very carefully. A working environment in which employees are accepted and have the chance to play to their strengths is key. When dealing with performance issues, there is a need to be sensitive and conscious of the extent to which employees need guidance or alternative wishes to be input in their process themselves. Clear communication is crucial, and these should focus on the individual's strengths as well as their areas of weakness. Recruitment processes can be a potential barrier to neurodiversity, and care should be taken to avoid being discriminatory. Simple solutions include offering multiple application methods, avoiding ambiguous generic job adverts, setting out only relevant tasks at the interview stage, and ensuring that the selection process gives candidates the chance to demonstrate their abilities in different ways. As in any circumstance, greater awareness can help. Employers should be proactive in providing information on neurodiversity for those with neurological conditions, as well as for those without. Employees with certain conditions that are not always fully aware of the ways in which it might affect their ability to perform tasks, having access to a network of employees can be an invaluable source of information and support. Some aspects of good support and management apply to all employees generally and not just those with a neurological condition. Giving clear instructions, ensuring staff are not overloaded, providing a work environment that is free of distractions. Allowing staff to channel themselves into tasks where they can excel rather than demanding that they continue to perform tasks that they are less suited to can benefit everyone. Placing too much emphasis on all-round generic competencies can disadvantage staff with neurological conditions who may have highly specialised skills that could be harnessed differently. Other practices do require tailoring to the individual, for example, in the case of an autistic staff, leading discussions and solutions finding, communicating unambiguously, and providing advance notice of changes so that individuals can be fully prepared. In providing appropriate support, think not just about the employee's roles and their work environments, but about a wider range of situations, for example, training, and bear in mind that these are spectrum conditions and that characteristics will vary across individuals and how they cope with their associated characteristics of their condition over time. The potential merits of having neurodiverse workforce should not be overlooked. Positive attributes commonly associated with this group include creativity, lateral thinking, bringing a different perspective, and development of highly specialised skills in the consistency in tasks they once mastered. Gender equality means that the different behaviour, aspirations and needs of women and men are considered, valued and favoured equally. Gender equity means fairness for treatment of women and men according to their respective needs. You can't say that you want your business to be more female friendly, so you're going to implement special benefits for women. This won't work legally, ethically, or motivate your workforce. You need to implement actions across the board, with the exception of maternity leavers, which obviously have biological implications. Men may take advantage of one area more than women, and women may take advantage of another at a greater rate than men do. But the key factor is that they're available to all people. When talking about flexibility, Harvard economics professor Claudia Goldman said that one of the reasons women earn less money than men is that they strongly prefer temporal flexibility over salary. That is, that they are willing to turn down higher paying jobs because those jobs come with more demanding hours or less predictable hours. Now, some jobs just don't have temporal flexibility. If you're a surgeon, for example, you can't just run out of surgery to go to a parents' evening. If you're an accountant, you can rather build some flexibility into your role. Whilst women are more willing to take less money in favour of flexible hours, men like flexibility too. See if you can implement policies that allow people to work from home either full-time or part-time or even time to time. Consider establishing core business hours and then let people stick to their schedules. Set schedules. Now, this recommendation may seem to contradict the previous suggestion of different workplaces. But different workplaces have different needs, If you run a retail or restaurant business, you can't force people to work from home because it just won't work. And equally, they can't just walk out in the middle of a shift because that will take toll on all the other employees. So you need to have people on site when you need them. Also, women, as noted, have primary childcare responsibilities, which means they are the ones who handle childcare, dentist appointments and meetings with teachers. They need to know their schedules in advance to plan these out. Otherwise, they have to shuffle childcare or even call in absent at short notice. The other thing to think about is salary openness. Companies consider that pay is confidential information and people consider it to be rude to discuss it. So the end result is no one talks about salary. But should employees, though? No one is cheated by an unfair salary when the employers are open about what positions pay. Another key point is training. So often people are promoted into management jobs based on their stellar performance as an individual contributor, which is fine, it's pretty standard and it's common. But managing people isn't like doing the work. In order to make your workforce comfortable for men and women, make sure that your managers are trained in how to manage. Let's be fair, a manager can break a company. Your managers know how to show relevant employment laws, for example. You can't treat people differently based on gender. You need to reward employee performance, not time in the seat, and you need to offer feedback to everyone. Most bad managers aren't bad people, though, they're just poorly trained. Get every manager trained and hold regular refresher courses so that your company is a great company to work for in every department. The final point I'm going to talk about is transgender. For transgender people, making the difficult decision to transition from being publicly a man or a woman to the gender they really identify with can be a traumatic experience. Whilst employers can help by showing understanding and support, some companies' response to the issue, though well-meaning, can lead to discrimination and humiliation. According to the LGBT charity Stonewall, transgender issues still cause a lot of anxiety amongst employees. They note that whilst employers are making great strides in terms of lesbian, gay and bisexual equality, they're lagging behind in providing for transgender staff. Those who are trans are not those whose gender is the same as sex assigned at birth. There is also Equality Act 2010, which includes gender reassignment as a characteristic protected from discrimination. A failure to protect such employees from bullying and harassment in the workplace will lead to constructive unfair dismissal claims. So it is important that employers make time to look closely at diversity inclusion policies and practices which support trans people. Transgender activist Jane Fay said that in some cases, employers' self-conscious attempts to cater for transgender workforces results in bosses tiptoeing around the issue, trying not to offend anybody, and therefore marginalising transgender staff even more. According to Fay, the biggest issue in many offices is the use of the toilet. Employers who ban their transitioning staff from using the female toilet may face legal action. Employers try to fix this problem in ways that people often don't realise is offensive, such as saying if you're trans, you can use the disabled facility. Here are some specific steps employers can take to demonstrate best practice. In the recruitment process, consider flexibility in terms of requirement for titles and genders and application forms. Ask for previous names sensitively. Provide high quality diversity and inclusion training to all staff at all levels. Consider the provision of an employee assistance programme. Every trans person will have a different experience, so address each situation individually. Have robust equal opportunities and specific gender identity policies, differentiated from sexuality or sexual orientation. These should emphasise a supportive, flexible and tailored approach. Discuss whether the employee would like any temporary changes to working arrangements, such as a period away from client-facing roles. This should be led by the employee. Manage data carefully and make a plan with the employee as to how their information will be updated. Avoid non-consensual disclosure and only retain previous identity documents that are required, such as for pension purposes. Provide reassurance about records. Disclosure of the individual's history should be controlled by that individual. Assess any practical barriers and minimize any feelings of isolation. Examples could be installing gender-neutral toilet facilities, offering gender-neutral uniforms, and flexibility relating to staff photos in early transition. Review your anti-bullying and equal opportunities policies regularly to ensure that they are fit for purpose and make it clear that any form of bullying will not be tolerated. Finally, the costs that we need to consider in respect of the impacts for poor practice. The costs of failing to support staff equally and provide equal opportunities are not just financial, but can seriously impact employee relations and production. If an issue is not tackled and poor behaviour is allowed to persist, then the credibility of those in charge is diminished. Employees will feel the business does not respect them, and this could have a knock-on effect to other employees. Where there is low morale, there is often a drop in performance, which can lead to cost and productivity. Ask yourself who wants to work somewhere where they consider opportunities will not apply to them or unfair treatment is allowed. Often absence and lateness increases, which is a huge financial and production impact burden. The impact on an employee in their well-being, finances and reputation should also be considered here. High turnover is never a good thing for any company, as average recruitment costs are stated to be around £3,000 per employee. And ultimately, this can lead to reputational and brand damage. Finally, there are also the legal costs to consider, but not only due to the fact that a discrimination claim has no limit in award at tribunal, legal fees are costly and management time to prepare and attend tribunal can be very high. I think we all agree that creating a positive working environment is better for all. So this is the end of the session. Can you now understand a little bit more about equality and diversity, identify ways that your people are different and understand different types of discrimination? I hope you found the session to be of interest and you've taken some points away for consideration. Alcumus PSM provide expert HR and employment law and health and safety consultancy support to SMEs all across the UK. If you have any questions or interest in our services, please contact us at the web addresses above.
Well, thank you, Melanie. That was quite a lot of food for thought. I'm at the moment just well staggered by how many issues I hadn't thought about in so many areas of that you've covered, and I do wonder whether we really need separate webinars on each of your
Yeah.
diversity issues. I mean, it's so many pitfalls that I never thought were there that companies could fall into, and I sort of thank for myself as a self-employed person, I don't have these problems in terms of staff, but clearly there are many challenges for businesses that you've given a good introduction to. So thank you for that. It's a pleasure. So thanks for putting all that together. But I do think there's a lot to concern us and to concern industries in general. I mean, just getting my head around it. Are you now, as part of Alcumus, are you getting a lot of requests from industry as to what is going on and how they should address these problems?
I'd definitely say it forms a huge part of the questions that we have to answer and the advice that we have to provide to staff. When we're talking about any particular case, we're always considering equality and diversity and those protected characteristics of employees that they have. There's also a greater call for equality and diversity training with the workforce, because as I said in the presentation, it's not sufficient nowadays just to have a policy that people read when they first start.
Yeah.
It's essential that people keep this in the forefront of people's minds, and it's a regular review with their staff.
Well, absolutely. I'm sure, well, having it refreshed and so forth is important, but there are some issues that people won't have come across when they first look at your policies and processes, and then a month, a year through their employment, suddenly they become more relevant to them. So I'm sure that's a necessary part of it.
Yeah.
What I hesitate to pick out any particular item. I mean, I couldn't make notes on all of them anyway, but by picking out one or two, it tends to seem that's where the major issues are, and that clearly isn't the case. They're across the board. But one of the points you were talking about back towards the beginning of your presentation was a Regis study on how offices businesses are coping with this, and one of the things that I picked on was that they were suggesting that by working at home, which is an excellent idea, the decreased hours for commuting was costing a lot of money effectively. It's certainly costing the individual workers money, but I got the impression that the study was suggesting that if you were working at home, you could actually work longer hours. I'm not sure that really would be something that the worker would want to consider necessarily.
No, that wasn't what I was trying to put across. I think what I was trying to put across was that when people have access to more flexible working options, including working from home, that they can be more productive in that they don't have that long commute to and fro. So they might be inclined to use that commuting time working. But equally, from their well-being point of view, they are more refreshed and they are more productive.
Okay, yeah. Yes, it does indeed, and I certainly like your issue about training managers to manage. And I think that's all part of it, to make sure that the people working at home know what's expected of them as well.
Yeah, it's essential that managers or supervisors, team leaders, whatever, anybody who's got some form of people leadership responsibility has an understanding of equality and diversity and how to manage staff, because it is, I mean, this was just a 20 to 30 minute webinar. The subject, I could deliver the training, it can take all day. It's a very, very large subject, and I've just picked certain key points out. But in order for managers and supervisors, etc., to feel confident, they should have a knowledge of this so that they can fairly, support their employees. Where there is a ignorance in this subject, then invariably a problem will arise at some point.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can quite understand how you can spend full days on various of these sections. hopefully, and I'm sure that businesses are indeed doing this. We're getting past the normal half-hour time, but just a couple of questions that have come in. Can you ask a candidate about their health in a work interview?
When it comes to job interviews and the recruitment process, an employer must take particular care regarding applicants' health and any disabilities. This is to prevent employers discriminating against individuals with health conditions, and job offers obviously should be made on the basis of merit. So as a result, there's laws on what and when an employee can ask about an applicant's health. However, an employee should be asking applicants if they need any reasonable adjustments, sometimes called access requirements, for any of the part of the recruitment process. But the employer should take care not to confuse this as being the same as asking a candidate whether or not he or she has any disabilities. If an applicant volunteers information about a disability or health condition, then interviewers should take particular care on how they follow this up with further questions, so it doesn't influence their recruitment decisions, apart from in very limited and set circumstances.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Just a few others I'm just scanning through. What is positive discrimination? Is it okay to implement this?
So positive discrimination is where you advertise, or rather you treat a specific protected group in a more positive way. But positive discrimination is generally unlawful in the UK. If an employee were to recruit a person because he or she has a relevant protected characteristic rather than because he or she was the best candidate, then this could be considered to be discrimination under the Equality Act. It's unlawful to set quotas to recruit or promote a specific number of proportion of people within a particular protected characteristic. There are limited circumstances, however, where it is lawful to require a job applicant or worker to have a particular protected characteristics, which is the genuine occupational requirement subject that I touched upon in the presentation.
Yeah. Okay. You touched on salary openness, and Anna Garod has asked if you could say a little bit more about this.
On salary openness?
Yeah.
Okay. I touched upon it because it's a subject where we are told often in the UK, do not discuss salary, and that's fine. You can actually, insist upon that. However, if you are paying staff equally for the job that they do, regardless of who is actually doing the job, then there should be some openness about what salary range that role has. That's the point that I was trying to get across.
Right.
Obviously, there's been the most recent change in respect of gender pay reporting, and that obviously has been the measure between men and women's average earnings across an organisation. That just touched upon male and female, though, and not any of the other protected characteristics.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's more that the asker wants to know about that, on the website or whatever. Now, as I think all the audience will know, we try and keep this down to a fairly tight lunchtime. And any of the further questions that we've got here, what we can do is we'll put them to you, Mel, ask you to answer these, and then we'll type them up or put them up on the web page, together with a recording of the presentation, which was excellent. So thank you very much, Melanie, for that. That was very helpful and informative.
Okay, thank you.
Well, our pleasure. So at this stage, I think there is for me to do is to say thanks for those of you that joined us. Thanks for listening. Have a great afternoon, and goodbye.